Hi class. Today we're going to cover chapter 4, section 4 and 5 together because they are both on proving triangles congruent. So our objectives today are to use the SSS, SAS, ASA postulates and the AAS theorem to test for triangle congruence. And we're going to learn what do all those letters mean. All right, so proving triangles are congruent, we have two things that we need to talk about, and they're going to come more into play tomorrow or the next day whenever we get around to talking about proofs. But let's talk about a postulate. It's a statement that describes a fundamental relationship between the basic terms of geometry. Postulates are accepted to be true without proof, so we assume that they're true. So a postulate, those we've learned at a few of those already, and they deal with our angles being congruent. Those are those angle relationships. Theorem, a statement or a conjecture that can be proven true by undefined terms, definitions, and postulates. So theorems can be proved by those postulates that we already found. So let's look at some things. First off, we're going to look at side congruence, so triple S. If three sides of one triangle are congruent to three sides of a second congruent triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So if we look at our picture here, we have our congruent markings, and so we can see that BA is congruent to ED. All right, so we went B to D, or B to A, E to D. Those are going to be those congruent sides. We also see that if we went BC, that's congruent to EF, and CA is congruent to FD. So we notice that all of those sides of the triangle are congruent. So our side congruent statement is saying if those are all three of those are congruent, then we know that our triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So if those sides are all equal to each other, that means our triangles are equal to each other. Then, if our triangles are equal to each other, therefore, we can see that angle A is going to be congruent to angle D, angle C is going to be congruent to angle F, and angle B is going to be congruent to angle E. So if our sides are all equal, our angles will all be equal. The one thing that we need to pay attention is if all of our angles are equal, we cannot say that our sides are all equal. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. All right, next one, side angle side congruence. If two sides and the included angle of one triangle are congruent to the two sides and included angle of a second triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So that's saying if we have a side like AB and it's congruent to DE, and we see that by their congruent markings, okay, and angle B is congruent to angle C. This is what it talks about when it's talking about included angle. Notice that B is between those two sides and E is between those two sides. That's that included angle. And our other side, BC, is congruent to EF. If those three things are all equal or congruent, then we know that our triangles will all be congruent. So A, B, C is going to be congruent to D, E, F. So then that angle is sandwiched between the sides. All right, so we have two more that we're going to talk about. Angle side angle congruence. If two angles, oops, not angels, two angles, and the included side of one triangle are congruent to the two angles and the included side of the other triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So in the last one, we had two sides and that angle was sandwiched in between. Here, we have two angles and that side is sandwiched in between. So angle B is congruent to angle E. We see that by those congruent markings. BA is congruent to ED. That's our side. And then last, angle A is congruent to angle D, then those are going to also be congruent. So those three, if that happens, then we have our triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Angle side, and this is our last one that we're going to talk about. If two angles and the non-included side of one triangle are congruent to the corresponding angles and side of a second triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. So now, this time, instead of it being the angle, the side, and then the other angle, it's the non-included side. So it's angle, angle, and then a side next to it. So let's go ahead and look at this. If angle A is congruent to angle D, again, we can see that by our congruent markings, and angle B is congruent to angle E, and then that non-included side, BC, is congruent to EF. Then we know that our two triangles are going to be congruent. A, B, C is congruent to D, E, and F. So it's really about knowing the order of angle, angle, and then that other side. So let's go ahead and look at some of these with the problems. So, can you prove the following triangles are congruent? If so, which congruent statement? Side, 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 angle, side, angle, 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 side. So notice there's no angle, side, side. Pay close attention to that. So looking at this problem, we see that all three sides have been marked as congruent. So we can say that yes, these two are congruent by side, side, side. So see how it was as simple as seeing what was congruent. All right, can you prove the following triangles are congruent? If so, which congruent statement? Side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side. So let's look at this. Well, we see these two triangles are next to each other. So the one marking that's not on there that we can deduct is that this side right here is shared. So those are congruent sides because it's the same. So I have that side and then the one with the two markings. But I don't have the third one, and I don't have the angle in between them. So I cannot conclude anything about this one. So no, we don't know if these two are congruent without knowing the third side or an angle. All right, so I want you guys to go ahead and try C and D for tomorrow. With D, you're going to have to add in some information that you know. So look at seeing about what's congruent and sides or angles. All right, last one here we have is find the value of x. So we know that these two are congruent. So BCD is congruent to WXY. So W and B go together, X and C go together, and D goes with Y. So now that I've made those congruence markings, go ahead and I want you to find the value of x. And so there's a couple different ways you can do that with this one, and come down with that for tomorrow. See you guys then.